Mommy has one
You
too.
like this old thing?
6 words from a
It's a
6-year-old.
star.
And a grown man kneeling in the hay
Way
went
back home.
completely still. Because the tattoo she was pointing at belonged to a woman he hadn't seen in 7 years. His hands stopped moving. The bandage in his fingers just hung there. To understand why those 6 words nearly stopped his heart, we have to go back to one ordinary Montana afternoon. The day two lost little girls wandered onto the wrong man's land and walked straight into a secret nobody was ever supposed to find. Paradise Valley, Montana doesn't get many surprises. It gets sunrises over the Absarokas, the smell of leather and pine, the same slow Tuesdays it's had since before Dean was born. He liked it that way. A man could disappear into a place like this if he needed to. And 7 years ago, Dean Whitaker had needed to. He ran the horse operation at a ranch outside town now. The kind of work that left calluses on his hands and dust in the creases of his neck. His son Toby, 7 years old, sat on the top rail of the fence most afternoons, narrating the lives of the foals like they were soap opera characters. It was a good life, a small life. Dean had built it that way on purpose. 40 miles north, in a glass-walled retreat cabin outside Big Sky, a different kind of life was coming apart at the seams. Sloan Hastings, CEO of Hastings Logistics, a woman Forbes once called untouchable. She sat with her phone in both hands, watching her company's stock ticker bleed red. A scandal was unfolding online, hour by hour. Her assistant kept saying the same 4 words. "It's getting worse, ma'am." Sloan didn't look up. She'd perfected that over many years. The art of not looking up. What nobody at Hastings Logistics knew, what nobody but Sloan and one man in Paradise Valley knew. Her hands weren't shaking because of the stock price. They were shaking because her daughters were missing. Ivy and Willow, 6 years old. They'd wandered off from the trail life riding group an hour earlier, chasing a barn cat through a stand of lodgepole pine. 2 little girls in matching yellow rain boots, swallowed up by a forest that didn't care whose daughters they were. Dean found them. Of course it was Dean. He knew every deer trail and dry creek bed on that land, the way other men knew their own kitchens. He found them sitting on a fallen log, Willow crying softly, Ivy doing her level best to look brave about it, the way an older sister will. "Hey now," he crouched low, the way he might with a spooked colt. "You two are about the bravest lost girls I ever met." Willow had scraped her wrist on a branch, nothing serious. But it was bleeding, and Dean, gentle as anything, reached for the little first aid kit clipped to his belt. He rolled back her sleeve to clean the cut. That's when he saw it. A scar. Small, pale, shaped almost like a comma right along the bone of her wrist. He'd seen that exact scar before. He'd helped bandage it himself, once, a long time ago, on a baby who wasn't yet old enough to walk. His hands went still. Not from fear. From shock, so sudden it felt physical, like the floor had dropped 6 inches beneath him. "You fell." His voice came out before he could stop it. "When you were 8 months old. I bandaged this for you, once." Willow blinked up at him, confused, but it was Ivy who tilted her head, studying him the way only a 6-year-old can, without manners, without mercy, straight to the heart of the thing. That's when she saw it. The faded mark on Dean's wrist, just below his rolled-up sleeve. A small, 5-pointed star, gone silvery with age. Her eyes went wide. "Mommy has one too." Ivy whispered it. "She covers hers with her bracelet, but I've seen it. It's just like that." Dean Whitaker, 37 years old. A man who'd once walked away from more money than he'd ever see again, just to keep a promise nobody asked him to keep. He froze completely, because some promises don't stay buried, not even in Montana, not even after 7 years. And in that glass-walled cabin outside Big Sky, a woman who'd built an empire on control was about to learn something. The truth doesn't ask permission to come home. Dean carried Willow on his hip the whole walk back to the ranch house. Ivy marched alongside like a small, determined general. By the time they reached the porch, Toby had already spotted them from the fence. "You found him!" He vaulted down faster than any 7-year-old has business vaulting. He looked at Ivy first, suspicious, the way an only child sizes up competition. Then Willow smiled at him. A real smile, gap-toothed and easy. Something in Toby's posture softened. By the time they reached the kitchen, he was telling them about a foal named Biscuit, who, in his professional opinion, was basically a dog. It might have been a nice afternoon. It might have stayed simple. Then the SUV came up the gravel drive, and simple ended. Sloane Hastings stepped out before the engine had fully stopped, heels sinking slightly into the dirt. Her composure pulled tight as a drum skin. She saw her daughters safe on the porch, and her shoulders dropped half an inch with relief. Then she saw Dean. The half-inch came right back. Their eyes met across the yard, the way two people's eyes meet when there are 7 years and a wall of silence sitting between them. Neither one said hello. "Girls?" Sloane's voice stayed even. "Go on inside with." She glanced at Toby. "With your new friend. Let me speak to Mr. Whitaker." Toby sensed adult weather rolling in. He herded the twins toward the kitchen with the gravity of a boy who'd watched enough westerns to know when to clear out of the saloon. The screen door banged shut. Sloane's mask cracked just slightly at the corners. 5 times. Her voice was flat. 5 times what I offered before. You sign it, and you never set foot near my children again. Dean didn't answer right away. He looked at his boots. He looked at the tattoo on his wrist. The one a 6-year-old had recognized from 40 feet away. No. Simple as that. "Dean." "I said no, Sloane." His voice stayed low, steady, the voice he used on spooked horses and frightened children. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't go looking for your girls. They walked onto my land. That's not something money fixes." Sloane's jaw tightened. For a CEO who negotiated 9-figure contracts before lunch, she looked, just then, like a woman who'd run clean out of leverage. Inside the kitchen, the conversation was quieter, but it was about to do far more damage. "Toby," Ivy perched on a stool, swinging her legs. "How did your dad know I fell when I was a baby?" Toby shrugged, pouring lemonade with the careless confidence of a boy who'd clearly done this exactly twice before and spilled it once. "He just knows stuff. He's real smart about people. And horses." "No," Ivy pressed harder. "But how did he know? Like, he knew it. Like he was there." Willow had gone very still over her glass. Neither girl said anything else. But something had been planted, a small, sharp seed of a question that wasn't going to stay quiet for long. Outside, the SUV pulled away in a cloud of dust. Small hands waved out the back window. Dean stood in the yard a long while after the taillights disappeared over the ridge. The way a man stands after a flood has passed through, checking what's still standing. That night, alone in the barn, he found himself in front of the same stall. 7 years ago, he'd stood there, holding an envelope thick with money and a single sheet of paper that would have erased him from 2 children's lives forever. Sloane had been 27, sitting across from her father's old business partner, Harold, in an office with a view of the Beartooth Range she could no longer stand to look at. A single mother loses credibility in this industry. Harold told her flatly, the way he told her everything, like weather reports. You need this handled, quietly. She'd found Dean 3 weeks later, in a saddle shop outside Gardner. She remembered his hands, steady, working hands, and how strange it felt, sliding an envelope across his workbench instead. The children will have everything, she told him, better than you could give them. All I need is your signature and your silence. Dean had picked up the envelope. He'd actually picked it up, he told himself, holding it, that a poor father with calluses and a small house wasn't enough. That love without money was a kind of cruelty he didn't want to inflict on 2 babies he'd never even held. For one long, terrible night, he believed it. He hadn't signed, not in the end. He'd stood in this same barn, looked down at the small blue star he'd inked onto his own wrist the week the twins were born. A promise to himself, nothing fancier than that, and put the envelope in the wood stove instead. He'd told himself, walking away from Sloane's life forever, that disappearing was the promise. That staying gone was the only gift he had left to give. Now here he was again, 7 years later, the promise cracked wide open by a 6-year-old's whisper in a horse barn. Across the valley, in the cabin outside Big Sky, Sloane stood in the dark hallway outside her daughter's bedroom door. She did this most nights, had for years, listening through the wood for the small sounds of their breathing. Never quite brave enough to go in and risk them seeing her cry. Tonight, through the door, she heard something new. Whispering. Ivy's voice low and urgent. The man with the star. Sloane's hand froze on the doorknob. She did not go in. Morning came to the cabin outside Big Sky the way it always did. Pale gold over the mountains, magpies arguing in the pines. But Sloane Hastings hadn't slept. She'd spent the night the same way she'd spent 100 nights before, standing outside a door she couldn't open, listening to a truth she couldn't unhear. By 7 a.m. she'd made her decision the way she made every hard decision. Quickly, coldly, before her own heart could talk her out of it. She would pay him. Today, whatever it took. Sloane drove out to the ranch herself. The same leather folder from the night before sat untouched on the passenger seat. She found Dean in the horse barn, exactly where she expected him. Except he wasn't alone. Ivy and Willow sat on an overturned feed bucket beside him, matching expressions of stubborn purpose on their small faces. They'd slipped out of the cabin at dawn, walked the half-mile of fence line themselves, and arrived before their mother could say a word. "Girls," Sloane's voice cracked, just slightly on the word. "How did you—" "We heard you on the phone." Ivy's chin lifted. The bravest 6-year-old in 3 counties. "You said you'd pay him to disappear." The barn went very quiet. Even the horses seemed to be listening. "Mom, don't pay Dad." Ivy's voice got louder, loud enough to bounce off the rafters. "I don't want Dad to disappear like everyone else." Willow didn't say it loud. Willow never said anything loud, but what she said next landed harder than her sister's shout ever could. "I've always felt lost." She looked down at her shoes. "Even when I had everything. I don't want to pretend anymore." 8 words from a 6-year-old. And a CEO who'd survived hostile takeovers, board revolts, and a public scandal that would have broken most people, finally lost her footing completely. Sloane stood there in the doorway of a horse barn in her tailored coat, the leather folder still in her hand. Something inside her chest gave way like ice cracking on a pond in early spring. Not all at once, just enough to hear the sound of it. Dean didn't say a word. He didn't need to win an argument he hadn't started. He just sat down on an overturned bucket of his own and let both girls lean their small shoulders against him. Ivy on one side, Willow on the other. The way children lean against the one thing in a room that feels steady. It was, Sloane realized, watching from the doorway, the first time in 7 years she'd seen either of her daughters look like that. Like they weren't performing for anyone. Like they weren't being perfect. Like they were just being 6. She thought of every birthday party catered to perfection. Every photograph staged for the company newsletter. Every "I'm fine, Mommy," she'd taught her daughters to say, without ever quite meaning to teach it at all. She set the leather folder down on a hay bale. She didn't open it. "I'm not paying anyone today." She said it quietly, to no one in particular, and even she seemed surprised to hear herself say it. It would have been a fine place to end the morning, a small mercy, a held breath let out. But Sloane Hastings hadn't built an empire by leaving herself room to feel things for very long. By the time she climbed back into the SUV, the old armor was already sliding back into place, plate by plate, the way it always did. Her phone buzzed before she'd even reached the end of the gravel drive. Harold's name on the screen. The board, he said, was very concerned about optics. A photograph had already surfaced online, taken by a stranger on the trail ride the day before. Two little girls leaning against a ranch hand nobody could yet name. "Handle it." Harold's voice stayed flat. The same weather report voice he'd used 7 years ago. Quietly. Quietly had worked once before. It had cost her 7 years, and she was only now beginning to understand. A piece of both her daughters she might never get back. This time, Quietly was about to cost her something far worse. By the time Sloane reached the cabin, the calm of the morning had already curdled into something tighter and more desperate. She poured herself coffee she wouldn't drink and stared at the leather folder, still unopened on the kitchen table. Like it might do the deciding for her if she just waited long enough. Outside the window, down the long dirt drive, a single car she didn't recognize had pulled up to the gate. A report drawn, she guessed correctly, by that one grainy photograph already circling online. The first one, not the last. Inside the ranch house kitchen, miles away, Toby was pouring lemonade again, getting better at it. Only a little spilled this time. Ivy and Willow sat at the table, quieter than before. The way children get quiet after something large has happened that they don't quite have the words for yet. "Is your dad gonna disappear?" Willow asked Toby, very softly. Toby considered this with the seriousness of a boy who took most things seriously when it came to his father. "No." He shook his head. "My dad doesn't disappear. He just goes quiet sometimes. There's a difference." Willow thought about that for a long moment, turning her lemonade glass in slow circles on the table. By that evening, the scandal had stopped being a story about quarterly earnings. It had become a story about Sloane Hastings herself. A CEO. A single mother. Twin girls. A stranger in Montana with a tattoo that matched her own. The internet, as it tends to do, had connected the dots faster than Sloane could control the narrative. The resolve she'd felt that morning in the horse barn had worn thin by dinner time. The board called twice before the meal, 3 times after. "Clean this up," they told her. "Tonight, if possible." Sloane sat alone in the cabin's great room long after the girls had gone to bed. The same leather folder lay open now on the table in front of her. The very one she hadn't been able to open that morning. A pen rested on top of the papers like a loaded thing. She picked up her phone and called Dean. "Come to the cabin." Her voice was tight. "Now, please." He almost didn't go, but there was something in the word please. A word he didn't think he'd ever heard Sloane Hastings use. It got him in his truck within 5 minutes. She met him on the porch, the leather folder pressed against her chest like a shield. The amount on the contract inside it would have set Dean up comfortably for the rest of his life. He didn't even glance at the number. "The board wants this finished by sunrise." Sloane's voice was shaking now, the careful CEO calm gone entirely. "Finished, or I lose the company my father built. Children don't need a poor father, Dean. They need a future. A real one. Sign it, please." It's worth pausing here, because the way Sloane was fighting for control of that moment had very little to do with Dean at all. Sloane was 9 years old when her mother left, not suddenly, slowly. Worn down by a husband who called her sadness inefficient. Walter Hastings hadn't raised his daughter to feel safe. He'd raised her to be useful. "Hastings women don't need anyone," he told her the week after the funeral that wasn't a funeral. Just an empty closet where her mother's coats used to hang. "Hastings women don't cry where people can see." She was 9. She believed him for 25 years. Every report card became a transaction after that. Praise traded for performance. Never once for simply existing. Sloane learned early that love came with conditions, that the safest way never to be left again was never to need anyone enough to be hurt by them. Tonight, on this porch, she wasn't just protecting a company. She was protecting the 9-year-old girl who'd promised herself, in front of an empty closet, that she'd never feel that small again. Dean took the pen. He actually took it. His hand hovered over the line at the bottom. The porch light buzzed faintly overhead. An old moth circled it the way moths do. He thought of the mansion the girls would grow up in, the schools, the horses far finer than any on his ranch. He thought of himself, a saddle-maker turned ranch hand, calluses and a faded star tattoo, nothing in his bank account that would ever impress a school admissions board. I'm just a burden. The same thought that had nearly cost him everything 7 years ago. It's worth pausing here, too, because what Dean was feeling has a name. Even if nobody on that porch would have used it. Psychologists call it the worth wound. The quiet, lifelong belief that what you have to offer only counts if it can be counted. Plenty of good fathers carry it. Plenty of good mothers, too. The ones who skip their own birthdays so the kids could have theirs. Who never once thought to ask if love needed a bigger bank account to be real. Dean wasn't weak for almost signing that paper. He was simply repeating the only math anyone had ever taught him. That less money meant less worth. The pen touched paper. She had been listening at the hallway door the whole time. Willow. Barefoot. In pajamas patterned with tiny horses Sloane had bought her without even noticing the irony. She'd heard every word, and when she saw the pen touch the paper through the gap in the doorway, something in her small chest broke open completely. She ran. Not walked, ran. The way only a child runs when the stakes feel like the whole world. Bare feet slapping against the porch boards, straight into her mother's legs, clinging hard enough to leave white marks where her fingers pressed. "Mommy!" she sobbed into the fabric. "Don't make Dad leave!" The pen stopped, hovering a half-inch above the signature line. "I'm tired of having to be perfect." Willow's words came out broken, unrehearsed. Nothing like the careful, composed child Sloane had spent years raising. "I don't want you to keep hiding anymore. Please, Mommy, please stop hiding." Sloane's first instinct rose before she could stop it. Old. Automatic. Inherited. "Willow, stop this. You're making a scene." The words were already climbing her throat. Her father's exact rhythm, his exact coldness, ready to come out in her own voice, the way they always had, whenever softness threatened to show itself in that family. Crying doesn't build anything. She nearly said it. She had said it before. Once. Only once. Months earlier. And hadn't understood until just now where the sentence had even come from. It wasn't hers. It had never been hers. It was a dead man's voice, borrowed for 25 years, and she was one breath away from handing it to her own daughter the same way it had been handed to her. She didn't say it. There's a kind of children's grief that doesn't look like grief at all. It looks like good manners, like straight A's, like a 6-year-old who never once threw a tantrum in 7 years, because somewhere along the way she learned that calm was the price of being loved in that house. What Willow did on that porch wasn't a meltdown. It was the first honest thing she'd been allowed to feel out loud in longer than her mother wanted to count. And sometimes, the most important breakthrough in a family doesn't come from the grown-ups finally talking. It comes from a child finally being believed. Of every hard thing Sloane Hastings had survived, hostile boardrooms, a public scandal, a marriage that never was, nothing had ever cut as deep or as clean as her own daughter's voice breaking on the word, please. Sloane's hand began to shake. The pen slipped slightly in her grip. She looked down at Willow's small face, tear-streaked and pleading, and then at Dean, still holding the pen above the line. His jaw tight. His eyes, she noticed now, really noticed, for the first time in 7 years, full of the exact same fear she felt. He wasn't trying to take anything from her. He never had been. He was just as scared of losing them as she was. Watching her hand shake, Dean felt something shift in himself too. Not triumph, not vindication, just recognition. She wasn't his enemy. She never really had been. She was just as frightened as he was. Her fear simply wore a much better suit. Fear, it turns out, is rarely the villain people make it out to be. It's more like weather. It shows up whether you invite it or not, and the only real choice is what you build to survive it. Sloane had spent 25 years building walls. Dean had spent 7 years building distance. Neither of them had built what their daughters actually needed, which was simply this: two parents brave enough to stand in the same room and admit they were both afraid of the exact same thing. I was about to sign it. Sloane whispered it, mostly to herself. I was about to make him disappear. Again. She thought of every NDA, every payment, every story she'd told herself about protecting her children. And understood, standing on that porch with her daughter's arms locked around her knees, that she had spent 7 years protecting the wrong thing entirely. Control feels like safety while you're holding it. It's only afterward, usually much afterward, usually too late for comfort, that a person realizes control was never actually protecting anyone. It was only protecting her from having to feel something she couldn't manage. Sloane had learned, in front of an empty closet at 9 years old, that the world rewarded women who never let it see them shake. Tonight, on a cold porch in Montana, her own daughter was teaching her the opposite lesson: that the people who love us best don't need us to be unshakable. They just need us to be honest. She had been so afraid of losing control that she nearly lost the two people control was supposed to be protecting in the first place. The pen never touched the line again. Dean set it down on the small porch table. Quiet, like setting down a tool he no longer needed. Sloane sank down to Willow's level, right there on the cold porch boards, and wrapped both arms around her daughter for the first time and longer than she wanted to admit. Over Willow's shoulder, through the screen door, she could see Ivy standing in the hallway, watching. Not running this time, just watching. The way the oldest of two children learns to watch, gathering up the moment to remember it later. I'm sorry. Sloane said it into Willow's hair, the words coming out rough, unrehearsed, nothing like a press statement. I'm so sorry. Some people don't become cold because they stop feeling. They become cold because somewhere along the way, someone taught them that feeling was the most expensive thing they owned. Across the dark yard, a single set of headlights appeared at the bottom of the long gravel drive. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. Not a reporter, not yet. But by morning, there would be more. Many more. Because 3 states away, a young woman named Lila, Sloane's assistant for 3 quiet, careful years, had finally decided one leaked photograph wasn't the whole truth, and that the rest of it deserved to be told too. By the time the sun came up properly over the Beartooths, the story was already everywhere. Lila's message, careful, factual, free of malice but heavy with 3 years of guilt, had reached one reporter overnight. And one reporter, as it turns out, is all it ever takes. Vans with satellite dishes lined the road outside the cabin by 8 a.m. Sloane's phone hadn't stopped ringing since 6. She had spent 7 years building walls so high, nothing could get through them. By breakfast, every single one had come down at once. Harold called first, his voice tight with something close to panic. Deny it. He said it fast. Deny all of it. Say it's a misunderstanding. Say the man's a stalker. Say anything, Sloane. The board meets at noon. Sloane stood at the kitchen window, watching the cameras gather at the end of the drive like crows on a fence line, and felt, for the first time and longer than she could remember, something other than fear. She felt tired. Not the tired of overwork, the kind she'd carried like a second job for years. A different tired. The tired of a person who has finally set down something far too heavy to keep carrying alone. No, she told Harold. Sloane. No, she said it again and hung up. She found Dean in the yard, loading hay with Toby, the boy chattering about Biscuit's opinion on rain. Ivy and Willow sat on the porch steps nearby, watching the news vans with the wide, unbothered curiosity of children who don't yet know what cameras cost a person. They're going to ask me to deny it, Sloane said it quietly. Dean set down the hay bale. And I'm not going to. She walked to the end of the drive alone first, just to see it, just to feel the size of what she was about to do. and then walked back to get her daughters. "Are we going somewhere?" Ivy asked, taking her mother's hand without being asked. "Yes," Sloane nodded. "We're going to tell the truth." Dean fell into step beside them, without a word needing to pass between them. Toby trotted alongside, holding Willow's hand the way an older brother might, though he'd known her all of 2 days. The four of them, 5, counting Toby, walked down that gravel drive together, past the split-rail fence, toward more cameras than any of them, except Sloane, had ever stood in front of. The reporters surged forward with questions, a wall of noise and lenses. Through it all, Sloane's phone buzzed one more time in her coat pocket. The board. Live. Watching this happen in real time, the way the whole country was about to. She let it ring. She stepped up to the small cluster of microphones someone had hastily set up at the end of the drive. Dean, a half-step behind her. Ivy and Willow on either side of her, like small, brave sentries. "I'm sorry." Sloane said it, and her voice, for once, didn't sound like a CEO's voice at all. It sounded like a mother's. "I'm sorry for hiding the truth for so many years." A ripple went through the small crowd. Cameras adjusted. Microphones leaned closer. "This is Dean Whitaker." She nodded toward him without looking away from the lenses. "He's a rancher here in Paradise Valley. He is Ivy and Willow's biological father. I was wrong. Wrong to think that money and silence could protect my daughters better than the truth ever could." For a long moment, nobody said anything at all. Even the reporters who make a living filling silences seemed unsure what to do with this one. It was Ivy who broke it, stepping forward, her small hand finding Dean's rough one and holding on tight. "We want to stay at the ranch for one more day," she announced it, loud enough for every microphone to catch it. "With Dad and Toby." Willow, quieter, tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered something only Sloane could hear. "Can you stay with us too?" Sloane Hastings, CEO of a company whose stock was, at that exact moment, dropping by the second on every screen behind her, looked down at her daughters, then up at Dean Whitaker, and for the first time in 7 years, she smiled. Really smiled. The kind that reaches the eyes and stays there. Her phone, forgotten in her coat pocket, was still ringing. She didn't answer it. The next morning came up soft and gold over Paradise Valley, the way Montana mornings do when they've decided to be kind. The news vans were gone by then, most of them anyway, chasing the next story the way news vans always do, leaving the ranch quiet again, the way Dean liked it. Ivy and Willow were up before breakfast, already in borrowed boots 2 sizes too big, begging Toby to show them the smart one. Biscuit, who had, in fact, recently learned to open his own stall latch, and was technically barred from demonstrating it. After everything, the headlines, the boardroom calls, the 7 years of silence. What these 2 little girls wanted most wasn't an apology, or an explanation, or even a mansion. It was simply this: one more morning with their father, on his land, doing nothing more complicated than riding a horse. Dean led them out across the grassland at an easy walk. Toby riding alongside Willow's pony, like a self-appointed older brother, narrating every blade of grass with the seriousness of a tour guide. Ivy rode just ahead, laughing at something only she found funny, her voice carrying clean across the valley. Sloane stood on the cabin porch and watched them go. Really watched, the way she hadn't let herself watch much of anything in years. Always one eye on a phone, one foot already moving toward the next crisis. This morning, both feet stayed put. She wasn't hiding her tattoo anymore. The bracelet sat on the porch railing beside her coffee, and the small, faded star on her wrist caught the morning light same as anyone's. Dean turned back once, halfway across the field, and waved. The girls beamed. And it struck Sloane, watching from the porch, that she hadn't seen either of them smile quite like that in longer than she wanted to count. Not posed, not practiced, just happy. The plain and uncomplicated kind of happy that doesn't perform for anyone. Some healing doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it just comes with a horse, a borrowed pair of boots, and a father who finally gets to say the thing he'd been carrying for 7 long years. Later, with the girls worn out and dozing on a quilt in the shade, Dean knelt beside them and said the thing plainly, the way he said most things. "I don't have money," he told Ivy and Willow, though by then they were half asleep and would only half remember it. "I don't have a private jet, or a corner office, or any of that. But I've got one thing nobody could ever pay me to give up. I will never disappear just because somebody hands me a check to do it." That evening, Sloane joined Dean on the cabin porch, 2 mugs of coffee between them, the valley settling into that particular blue dusk that Montana does better than almost anywhere. Down below, fireflies were starting up near the fence line, and somewhere off in the trees, an owl was getting an early start on the night shift. Sloane slid the bracelet off her wrist and set it on the railing, where it would stay, she decided, from here on out. Dean held his own wrist up beside hers. The porch light caught both faded stars at once, hers small and silver pale, his a touch darker. Both of them 7 years old, and neither one regretting the ink anymore. "We were lost," Sloane said it quietly, watching the 2 stars rest side by side. "But we found our way back." Inside, through the screen door, Ivy and Willow were already asleep on the living room floor in a tangle of quilts. Toby curled up between them like he'd always belonged there, like the 3 of them had simply been waiting their whole short lives for someone to put them in the same room. The story that started with a whisper in a horse barn ends, fittingly, in the quiet. No scandal left to chase, no secret left to guard. Just 2 stars on 2 wrists and 4 children's worth of peace finally settling over one small Montana ranch. This story reminds us that the truths we carry alone don't get lighter with time. They just get heavier to set down. Sloane learned that the hard way, in front of cameras, in front of her own daughters. You don't need cameras to learn it gentler. Tonight, before the news comes on, sit at the kitchen table with the photo album you haven't opened since the funeral, and tell one grandchild, even over the phone, one true thing you've never said out loud about their grandfather, good or hard. Saturday, when the grandkids visit, let them see you cry once, just once, over his old recliner, instead of tucking it away before they arrive. Children don't need us perfect. They need us honest, the same way Willow needed her mother. That's the whole lesson, really. Love isn't proven by what we hide. It's proven by what we're finally willing to show. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The soul of these stories comes from human experience, empathy, and courage. AI assisted only in language refinement, so that timeless lessons of justice, compassion, and standing up against wrong could move and educate viewers everywhere.